Okay, Ariel. First thing. Oh, by the way, my name's Gary.
Yeah.
I'm a retired teacher at Broward College, and I taught at a couple of universities adjuncts.
Very cool.
Yeah.
I adjuncted at Broward, at
Oh,
Central
you
and at
did?
South Campus for a little bit. Yeah.
Oh my God, I taught at South.
Oh,
Oh,
very cool.
oh,
Yeah.
okay.
I went to MacArthur High School.
All right, cool things.
Yeah, yeah. We used
All
to
right.
yeah, I was at PPO all the time, so I was in that space constantly as a kid and a teenager.
Okay, here's a coincidence. I wonder if you're going to remember this. Uh, okay, so I get AWP,
Hmm.
and I got one of them, and on the back page, I saw two short poems. And one of them was really witty about an immigrant or something who lost a dime and or couldn't find it or a dollar. And there was another one like that. And I thought, I just love that tone. And then I found out it was you. And that's when I started looking you up. But I guess you don't remember that.
I'm trying to think. It must have been. Was it about like trying to buy a slice of pizza?
Yes.
Yeah, 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 yeah. Yeah, that's in this book here. Yeah.
Okay. Hey, why don't we get into it? Why don't you want to? Do you know it off by heart? It's short.
Oh no, but I'll read it
Okay.
for you. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Uh, duh. Yeah,
Wow.
and this is dedicated to one of my best friends, Carly Hoffman, who's also a fantastic poet.
Oh, okay.
Eating a dollar slice in the rain. All the money I've spent on cheap umbrellas, I could have bought the greatest umbrella in the world, or an umbrella made of gold, something that doesn't cower in even the slightest wind. But poverty forces short sightedness, short breaths to keep moving, small portions. The sign says pizza slice $1, pizza slice with any toppings $2. Toppings are a luxury. If I had $3 for another shit umbrella, I'd still choose the pizza. If I had $2, I'd get two slices.
Oh, very nice. Okay. Uh, all right. Let's. Okay. A couple things. So, where were you born?
Say again?
Where were you born?
I was born in the Bronx, New York in 1990, but we didn't stay there for long. We moved to Orlando just before I turned 5, so like early 1995.
Okay. But your father and mother, were they from Dominican Republic?
Yeah, my dad's from the Dominican Republic. He came to New York in 1979. I think he was about 22 years old. And my mom is from Guatemala, and she came over about the same time. I think maybe 1977. She was a little younger. I think she was 19 when she came over. So they were and they met in New York. And we still have a lot of family there. Two of my mom's sisters and my godmother are still in the Bronx. And then one of my dad's sisters is in Manhattan, the other one's in Brooklyn, and then just more cousins than I can count.
Oh my God. Well, your dad, we'll get to it, but your dad really figures in your second book, The Under Capitalism.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, my dad. Yeah, I'm very lucky. My dad is also a writer and a poet.
Yeah.
So when I started translating my dad's writing because we have a great relationship. So I could talk to him and text him, and I was trying to improve my Spanish. That's kind of how I started translating. And it was just this kind of very bizarre experience because I can be very stupid, and so it didn't occur to me that my dad might write about my parents divorced about when I was 9 years old. And so I didn't think that maybe my dad wrote about that, or, you know, it would be kind of strange to see these old love poems from my mom. And then, but of course, with the awareness that things didn't work out between them. So it just put me in this kind of weird space and revisiting my family history and where I come from and my relationships to these spaces and to my family, you know?
Well, does that relate how you started writing poetry, translating your dad's poems?
No, no.
No. Okay.
Surprisingly, no. It's still kind of mysterious to me. I didn't write until I got to college. I had some vague interest in poetry towards the end of high school. I remember we read Emily Dickinson, and I liked it, even though I didn't understand it really at the time. And same with Sylvia Plath. So it wasn't until I got to FIU and started taking workshops. And then I was sharing that with my dad, and then my dad started sharing his writing stuff with me. He never imposed it on me or anything. I don't even know when I learned that he wrote poetry. But he's a big, my dad's house looks like my background. It's just books everywhere. So I grew up surrounded by books and loving to read, but I never really had the desire to write until I finished high school.
Was there a moment that happened?
No, that's the weird thing. It wasn't a moment. There wasn't a particular poem. It was just, I don't know what it was. Maybe I did want to write and was scared because I didn't read poetry either. All the stuff I was reading was fiction, big novels. But I mean, I would get in trouble for like reading the textbook in class. I'd be like in science class or world history, and I would just be reading ahead in the textbook to something interesting and not paying attention to what was going on in class. So I would just kind of devour books. And it must have been the end of high school when we read those Dickinson and Sylvia Plath poems that I don't know, I realized that poems exist, or they seemed, there was something about it that made me think I could do it. And not, I don't think in like an arrogant way or anything. Writing to me was like giant novels, and I had no desire, interest, or couldn't even fathom writing like, a Stephen King type novel. That's what a book was to me when I was a teenager. But there was something about encountering those poems that got me thinking that maybe I could do it. And then having classes in college where I could take them over and over again kind of helped me realize that I could do it, and then slowly practicing and trying to get better at it.
Well, it's interesting you mentioned Dickinson, because she writes short, very evocative and pungent poems. And you write a lot of short poems too. Although you've got a lot more humor, although so does she in a way, but yours are more suffused with humor. And we'll get to read some. So you mentioned Dickinson and Plath. Any other major influences?
Oh, sure. Well, my teachers at FIU are really my biggest influences. Denise Duhamel.
And I took a class with her.
Yeah, and they're both incredibly kind and intelligent and very nurturing people. And I was very lucky because I did my undergrad at FIU and then I did my MFA there. So I had a very prolonged and continuous poetic education with a couple of other people as well. And of course I had amazing classmates, but really I studied poetry at FIU for 7 years, and that's
7 years.
And that's, I think that's pretty unusual, I think. And I feel very lucky because they're both amazing.
Would you say you're a fastidious poet? Like when you revise almost everything. What's your process of revision? Is it ear, eye, some combination?
Yeah, it's a combination, and it varies from poem to poem. But it's really, it's the same process. It's for me, a poem is either done or it isn't. So the writing process is the same as the revision process, where it's both at once, and I just kind of keep tinkering away at it until I'm happy with it, or I've figured out the problem I'm having, or whatever it is. But it varies pretty wildly. But I do like to write and revise longhand, or I'll kind of go back and forth between my notebook and the computer. And I think the difference in the mediums allows me to think about the words differently. So it'll hit me different if I write it in my own handwriting than if I do it on the computer, and vice versa. So that's when I'm stuck with the revision, that's something that I'll do. If I was on the computer, I'll just write it out by hand. Or if I had been writing by hand, I'll switch to the computer whenever I get stuck.
That's interesting. Okay, so you go to both. Do you have trouble deciding whether your poem is finished? Or are you like me sometimes? You dream about a different ending and it drives you crazy?
Yeah, it's well, the upside to that is, that I could just write a different poem. But it varies, but I did dedicate a lot of time in grad school to trying to figure out how to know when I was done with a poem, or to be pretty close. And it's hard to explain that process because it was really the whole time I was there. But I also had the benefit of getting feedback from my peers and from my teachers.
Okay, sure.
But I would scrutinize my own work as much as I could before I showed it to anyone. So I would kind of try to come to a place where I thought it was done, and then I would share it with people, and that way I would either get good feedback and edits, or I would get confirmation that it was done. So after a couple of years, I had what to me was evidence that I've mostly figured out when I've written a poem that's done.
Okay. In terms of endings, sometimes, like, I find that more often than not, it's the sound of the ending that is more significant than the meaning. How does that relate to you?
Definitely true, but you know, trying to get both is
Yeah,
the
for sure.
difficult thing, right? But yeah, there's always that as well. It's that, what's the last sound, what's the last thing that a reader is going to leave with when they finish the poem, right? Not just the last line, but something I'm always telling my students is like, what's the last word of the poem as well, right? What is the actual last thing that they hear in their head when they turn the page after reading it? So I'm always kind of agonizing over last lines, last words, final sentiments in a poem.
Okay, so let's get to I got the two books I want to discuss are All My Heroes Are Broke.
Oh yeah.
That's what got me into your poetry. I just love this one. And then your latest, Under Capitalism, right?
Yep.
All right, so first thing is, and I like the way you play around with tone and irony. And so All My Heroes Are Broke.
Yeah.
You can look at the tone in different ways. Are they your heroes because they are broke, or is it sad? Are you making some kind of a comment? So you want to riff on that?
Yeah, it's a little bit of both. The title is a line in a song. A guy named Sims. He's this fantastic rapper from Minneapolis. The song is called Scope or Claw, and the sentiment of the song is that it's about being an artist, right? It's that, so the idea, all my heroes are broke, but also all of my heroes pursued their dreams, right? All of my heroes did the thing that they wanted to do despite the fact that it isn't, you know, monetarily viable or feeding into some kind of larger, you know, making money for somebody else, right? That somebody dedicated themselves to their art and the thing that they wanted to do, despite the fact that it's typically not profitable.
Unless you're some of the hotshots, right?
Yeah.
Now, what I notice in this book is, it's hard to put in language. It's sort of like a soft surrealism in a lot of the lines and in the tones of the poem. And there's a lot of poems where you're by yourself, but you're not lonely often. You're in a nice state, meditative state, or you're actually, you're in company with yourself. And the people around, they're not threatening or anything, but the strangers help. It's like a community. And a couple of poems here I'll have you read. I like one about Duncan. Yeah, and there's humor that suffuses this book quite a bit. And then we'll talk about the second book, which has a little bit of a change. What should I tell you? Do you have a short poem or two that you really like and want to share?
Sure. From All My Heroes Are Broke. Let's see. It's been a bit since I've read from this. But let me see if I find. Let's do.
Maybe I'll get one for you.
Yeah.
Well, by the way, I noticed, and this is just that oftentimes you're by yourself reading poetry in different venues. Like here we go, reading Keats at Freeman Station.
Oh, sure.
Next one is reading Lorca in the square.
Yeah.
Another one, yeah.
So, I was trying to, I think, replicate the spaces where I was thinking about poems.
Yeah.
Like those, you know, you find those quiet moments and you try to do that work in your head. And then somehow that became the setting for the poems, or a way for me to like enter a space. Because I always really valued that in poetry, a poem that felt like it was in the real tangible world.
Yeah.
And I think that was my I can be very literal minded, but I think that was my thinking at the time, was like, well, what if I just replicate the space I was in when I was thinking about this, and that'll be a way to get into a poem.
But what I also like is you're in a public space, and yet you have a solitude that allows you to be in that public space, but also into a meditative space or a poetic one.
Yeah.
And that comes across quite a bit, that you're comfortable with your solitude, and you're in New York too. So there are a lot of people, but you can be both, part of the crowd and not. So here's a nice one. Having a rum and Coke alone.
Oh, sure.
12.
Yeah. And that's after Frank O'Hara and Denise Duhamel also, who has a poem. He has Having a Coke with You, and she wrote Having a Diet Coke with You. So this is kind of written after both of them. Having a rum and Coke alone. I sit at the end of the bar, so there's only ever one empty seat next to me. In this way, I limit possibilities and think it control. Everything is fine. I turn to the window whenever someone walks by. A stranger would call that paranoia, but I know better. Finally, the bartender comes up all smiles, asks if I'm waiting for someone. Yeah, you.
Any comments about how this poem arose? Is this actually something that happened?
Oh, sure. Yeah, that's just, that's a poem about being stood up and just kind of making it a little dramatic. But I do, I might have wrote that at Gramps, actually, in Linwood. But yeah, it's just that kind of that solitude moment. I think a lot of those early poems in particular were trying to find the line between solitude and loneliness.
Yeah, exactly.
And playing around with either being aware or trying to be aware of which side of that line I was on in that moment. So I think that poem, that might be a good example of trying to frame it as solitude, but it's actually a loneliness, right? So that kind of pretending.
Yeah, and you certainly escaped being maudlin, right? Or self-pitying by a long shot.
Yeah. Well, I hope so. Yeah, that's the other line you try to.
I want to find. By the way, I love going to Dunkin' Donuts and just looking around and write poems too.
Oh yeah.
So here, and I like your humor. Also, you let the reader enter that physical space in very short, very little, not that much poetry there, or not a lot of lines. So we got 28. Nighthawks of the 24-hour donut shops.
Oh yeah.
I love this opening.
Thank you. Yeah, I'll read it for you. Real quick, the title is a line I borrowed from Campbell McGrath. And the scene is one that I learned from Denise Duhamel. In her first book, she has a poem, I think it's called Mr. Donut, and she's working the register at the donut shop. So I've definitely kind of reimagined the scene. And again, this is one I wrote in grad school, so I was thinking of both my teachers and this funny kind of donut coincidence I noticed in their work.
By the way, you're giving a real shout out for that FIU program, MFA program. I think they're really terrific. They're right up there. They're probably underrated, but you can help.
If anyone in Tallahassee is watching this, give them more money. Okay, FIU deserves more money, and that program deserves more money. Give them all the money. Okay.
Yeah. Okay. I second that. All right. So we're at the donut shop.
Nighthawks of the 24-hour donut shops. Midnight sun of the red blazing O in the window, a beacon for wanderers looking to escape the cold, or thrown out drunks trying to keep the night talk alive, until morning arrives like an express train, because the coffee refills here are free. The undergrad who works the graveyard shift lets them loiter, but has to remind them every single night that if they want that refill, they have to buy a cup of coffee first.
Very nice. Yeah. Any comments?
No, that was again, that's me trying to it's like the speaker projecting, right? He's kind of describing everyone else, but not himself, and that sort of leads one to imply that maybe he has more in common with these loitering drunks than he cares to admit.
That's what I love about your poems. There's that nice relationship. humorous, but also very serious in terms of your solitude and your connection with other people.
Thank you. Yeah, and it's fun. It's a
You're,
fun way to write a poem because it sort of invites the reader to be suspicious of the speaker. So I don't outright say that these are the things that I'm dealing with, but you know, if my speaker is constantly like, get a load of these guys over here, right? You kind of pick up on that he's one of those guys too.
yeah. Hey, you're a Whitman light, and that's not a criticism at all. I mean, you're multitudes and you love people.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And by the way, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, that's, you know, that's very important. I think for me in poetry and in art in general is that it's the desire for human connection, I think is why we make art, you know. It's
that's what I was drawn to. And there's so many different ways you do it, and it's such slight nuances, so it's not boring because you're often by yourself in crowds, but there's always some twist. And by the way, I like that you have one line ending on works at a graveyard shift. I like that. I love that line break. Any comments on that, or is that pretty obvious?
No, that's just fun. That's something that I try to pay attention to, and that I try to point out to my students too. That pause you get at a line break is a kind of a poem's natural punctuation. So if you can have fun there or play with it a little, where you can get a little bit of a double meaning maybe. That's always something to keep an eye out for.
Yeah. Okay. Now, whoa, from here to your new book.
Yeah.
Oh, a bunch of questions.
Yeah.
Well, we'll go right to the shift here in tone here. And we got under capitalism. Okay, I like that, under. So you get obviously more political in this one. More overtly political, yeah. Any comments about your change in content?
Sure, yeah. Well, it's to me, it's a natural progression. I think the seeds of it are in All My Heroes Are Broke, because it certainly has to do with my family and where they're from. And then into my second book, A Sinking Ship Is Still a Ship, which is very Florida-centric, but deals a lot with climate change and with the ocean and with rising water levels and that sort of imagery. So there is a kind of progression there. But yeah, a lot of this was written kind of just before the pandemic, and a lot of it kind of during that early part too. Being back in New York, having returned to the Dominican Republic in 2019. I hadn't been there since I was like 15, since like 2005. And so being back there with my dad, and he's, he's recounting his childhood, his teenage years, and telling me about all the turmoil in the country when he was growing up, and then me digging into that history. So this book really comes out of part of it. I think it is the natural progression of what I was working on, but it also, we were only there for about 5 days, but I had such interesting conversations with my dad, and being in those spaces that he had grown up in, and in that country really kind of pushed a lot of these poems and a lot of the thinking that went into them. And the other stuff that I was reading too, this title again is, I borrowed, this is a line from the great Salvadorian poet Roque Dalton. And it's a line that blew me away, but it also seemed so incredibly relevant that I wanted to use it to frame this book. Yeah,
it's maybe a coincidence. The last line, a word of your title is broke, and now we got capitalism in the new one.
Yeah. No, that's not a coincidence. That's definitely
transition.
Money and its importance is always weighing on me, as it is with many people.
So first question I have is, this one, you have all the poems translated in Spanish.
Yeah.
So that's a major decision and departure, correct?
Or
I haven't read your other books, so I don't know.
Well, the second book, A Sinking Ship Is Still a Ship, is also translated into Spanish. I would have liked to have done it with my first book, but I think because it was my first book and I was younger, it seemed like an audacious request. So I thought I would have to be like a certain level of success in order to pitch that, because I had no idea how to do it. I didn't want to translate my own poems, and I
Oh, I
didn't
see. Yeah.
money to pay someone to do it. So with if I could have had All My Heroes Are Broke in bilingual as well, I would have.
Oh, you would? Okay.
But I wasn't there yet I think as a writer, and as just like thinking about my work in that way. And then with the second book, it was so Florida centric, particularly to South Florida, that I wanted it. I that's when I was like, this needs to be in Spanish as well. And it was with a different publisher, and so we managed to get some monies and find somebody to translate. Nico, who's incredible, he translated Under Capitalism as well into Spanish. So it was a way to engage with my culture, not just my parents, but also, again, Miami is, how could I write a book about Miami and not have it be in Spanish as well? And then that carried over into this book. And if I get my say, every book I publish will be bilingual in English and Spanish.
Oh, okay. All right. Couple others, because I by the way, so you teach, what courses do you teach, and where in Louisiana, right? What do you know?
I teach at Louisiana State University in Baton Rouge, and I teach poetry workshops, undergraduate and graduate workshops. I taught a translation course last year, which is really amazing, and I teach a class for the undergraduate literary magazine, where they produce and publish the work of their fellow undergrad peers. It's a lot of fun.
Yeah. So I guess it's kind of, I remember grading papers were tough. So you probably have to balance your work as a teacher and as a poet, right? So are you up at writing quite a bit?
Yeah, I get a lot of writing done. Well, I worked as an adjunct for quite a bit. So when I was adjuncting at Broward College, I was also adjuncting at FIU, right? So I was teaching at
I remember
FIU campuses, the Broward South and the Broward Central. So you can imagine that kind of crazy commuting.
Yeah.
But as a full-time poetry professor, I only teach 2 classes a semester. So this is really, it's designed to give you time to write and publish, because that's what they want me to do, right? So it's
so far so good.
Yeah, this is a dream job. This is tremendous. And I got hired last summer, and I still kind of can't believe it. So,
Oh, congratulations. It's hard to get full-time jobs.
Yeah. And if, I would not have guessed that I would end up in the state of Louisiana, but I love it here now.
Oh, good. Okay. So the tone here, the other one, as I say, is a more mild and humorous, but there's a lot of bitterness that comes out here, and anger.
Yeah.
Not a criticism, just an observation.
Oh, yeah,
and
no.
The title, Under Capitalism. I like that preposition. So you may want to talk a bit about just that transition you made in terms of the book.
Yeah, it really came from kind of in the second book, but even in All My Heroes Are Broke, there's a poem called Magic City Ruse, if you remember that one. It's about going to a poetry reading on Miami Beach and just being in the worst possible mood because of the traffic, because of everything. And
I'll have to read it again.
Yeah, I remember bringing that poem into workshop with Campbell, and I remember his initial reaction being, this why are you so bitter? Like, this sounds kind of too bitter. And then it was like, we got to a place where it gave me access to this other poem space that I didn't have before. So it kind of unlocked something for me there. So there's a lot of that in the second book with Florida, and being kind of ambivalent towards the state and the city, and having this kind of deep bitterness, but also balanced with the humor. But in Under Capitalism, humor falls away a little bit because the bitterness is more serious, I think. And so it was trying to find a space, a shape for that kind of subject matter, because I hadn't really written. I had, kinds of poems that I know how to write. But I was veering off into a different sort of subject matter, so I had to figure out a different way to address it. I couldn't write, those more bitter, serious kind of political poems in the same way that I wrote the more playful poems, because that doesn't quite equate.
But what a coincidence! I think I got a poem that really captures that twinning of these a bitterness, but some humor and sarcasm.
Sure.
And this is about your father, and it's also funny too. Page 19. I love this poem.
Page 19. Oh, yeah, yeah. Yeah, I'll read it for you. And this is yeah, this is just like an anecdote that my dad told me. I can't remember how old I was when he told me that. Yeah, my dad arrives in New York City with the collected works of Mao in his carry-on, 1979. Hardcover too, the heaviness of his youth, something to keep close by as the Caribbean falls away into the bluing past. Mother taken by cancer, father waiting. Maybe his Socialist Party card protruding as a bookmark. The customs officer is appalled. No longer a red scare, but still a red disdain, some red apprehension. Why the fuck are you bringing this into the country, he says, red-faced. And my dad, perhaps ironically, perhaps sincerely, says, oh, I thought this was America.
Boy, that's a rich poem, politically and poetically and emotionally.
Thank you.
So you want to talk about it? You got Mao, you got Karl Marx.
Yeah, you know, and that's true. My dad was in, I forget whatever the name was when he was a teenager, but you know, whatever kind of youth socialist party sort of thing over there, and you know, so I grew up. We had that picture of Che Guevara, right? You know, right in the foyer when you came. If you walked into my dad's house, that would be the first thing you saw. You know,
yeah.
So it's just kind of an accumulation of details, but framing it in a funny way. Because my dad tells this in a funny way, right? He talks about himself and the things he's experienced in like a very humorous manner, and it was fun to try to like replicate that in a poem, and to because I'm glad it captures the bitterness and the humor.
Yes.
Because that is the bitterness and the humor of my dad. So like somebody's reaction to this poem was my reaction when my dad told me this little story.
Well, and there's some nice little touches. Maybe I'm reading too much in, and but red disdain.
Yeah.
I mean, that also relates to red communists, right?
Yeah. That's purposeful playing. Yeah.
Very clever.
Thank you.
Yeah. And I thought this was America. That has a lot of resonance.
Yeah, because it's that, you know, it's like, oh, I thought this was a free country. I thought I could do whatever I want. I thought I could read whatever I want and not have to, you know, have the government step in. So it's kind of it's sincere, but it's also my dad was being a sarcastic.
Yeah, that's what I love about you, the way you move, the tone.
Yeah.
And that's good because you don't want to be didactic, or you don't want to be too angry and there's too sentimental. So you have a nice, do you play with that a lot? Because you got to watch that sometimes.
Yeah. And it's, but I think the way I figured out how to do it, especially in this book, is by evoking my father, because that is, and that's the way he is, like in real life. And so I sort of, I'm not writing it in his voice, but I'm writing it like with his sensibility, I think. And I think that's why I'm able to pull it off, because it's not really, or maybe it is my voice. I mean, maybe, I guess I get that from him. But it's, I'm sort of putting the blame on him also. I'm framing it as this is what he did and this is what he's saying. So it's kind of the perks of a persona poem, but with the upside that the person I'm writing about loves what I write because he's my dad.
Well, I got to, and by the way, I don't want to keep you too long. It's just a couple more questions.
Sure.
But I got, I'm from Canada, but I've lived in Florida for like 42 years. Wow. So I've been blessed, which a lot of my very good American friends aren't, because as you do, I have a double consciousness. So I can always compare what's going on to the States and Canada.
Right.
God is there.
Yeah.
I used to say I'm America Light, but that is not true at all.
Yeah.
You know, but it's funny. What are your feelings? Probably a multitude of feelings in terms of America.
Oh, geez. Well, I think the book.
Write a book. I was about to say, don't you fit the book?
But I will say that you know, I have family in the Dominican Republic. I have a lot of family in Guatemala. My mom had 7 sisters, and they all have
7.
I have north of 40 cousins, and now they're all having kids. So the family on that side is gigantic. But I say that just to say that throughout my whole life, my parents have you know, watched the news from their respective countries, simply because that was their normal, you know. And
Okay.
so I grew up with that kind of awareness, and my world was always, even though I was born and raised here, my world has always been bigger than just the United States, because my family's, even though we're kind of broken, we're very close, and especially my mom is incredibly close with her side of the family, and most of them are over in Guatemala and always have been. So that's, you know, and you try to keep zooming out and look at the world as a whole, and that's of course difficult. But that was, I didn't have to learn how to do that because that was my normal. I was as aware of what was going on over there as I was about what was going on the local news in my own neighborhood. Or and I don't mean to exaggerate that it was like super in depth, but it was just, you know, I knew what was going on in Guatemala as a kid because we were in touch with our cousins and second cousins and aunts and uncles, and it was always, you know, it was like gossip. You know, they would tell us what was going on, what neighborhood drama, what politician did, you know, whatever. That stuff was kind of always in the air and in my ears.
Oh, okay. Oh, what are some of the poets, 2 parts, you admire and had the greatest influence on you? Some of them could be both.
Well, again, I have to give much credit to my teachers. Again, Denise DeHamel, Kim McGrath, and then I went to Queens College, Nicole Cooley, Kimiko Hahn, Emil Alcali, Roger Sederet. But I do love Sylvia Plath. I return to a lot. James, The Branch Will Not Break, and Shall We Gather at the River. I love Lorca. He's someone that I return to constantly. Trying to think of, don't you always blank when somebody asks you to start naming poets? There's just like there's a ton. All my friends too, my peers. You know, again, thinking of my friend Carly Hoffman, who's a tremendous poet. Thinking of Jose Olivares, who's fantastic. Ashley M. Jones is incredible. We could double the length of this interview.
Okay. Yeah.
People that I like or have influenced me.
Well, you like live and breathe and not eat poetry, but we could get a little dramatic here. But yeah, poetry has really been an integral part of your life, obviously.
Yeah. I've tried to make it so. Is also, you know, it didn't just kind of fall into my lap, or if it did, I tried to like nurture it and make it something that I could live in.
So here's a question. Have you sent any poems to South Florida Poetry Journal?
I might have when you guys first started, but I'll definitely send y'all some stuff. I'm writing, I'm doing a lot of translating, but I am working on some new poems. So yeah, you guys are great. I remember you guys must have started in like 17 or 16. I think I remember when the
16,
journal.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We've really grown, and I'm one of the associate editors, and I'm so proud, and I got to shout out to Michael and Lenny. They've done tremendous work here. So we'd love to have some of your work.
Yeah, for sure. I'll send some your way.
Oh, okay. And it's been a pleasure talking to you, and I'm gonna buy your earlier books.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that. And this has been great. I love to talk poetry, and I love anything that has to do with the Miami Book Fair. It's the greatest thing. I've been going since I was a kid, so it's kind of amazing to be able to go back there as an author. I don't think I'll ever get used to that, and I'll always be very grateful.
Well, I'll end with a compliment, because I like soft surrealism too, and I love humor. And you're like a kindred spirit that way. So the first time I read your first book, I thought, this guy his sensibility is so good. The worst people are those who take themselves too seriously. And you and I and others, we're not like that at all, right?
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Hey, and by the way, congratulations on getting a full-time job, because that's tough
Oh,
stuff.
thank you.
And
Yeah, that's.
your students are lucky.
I appreciate that.
Yeah.
I,
And
I,
by the
I
way,
think I'm the lucky one here, but yeah.
tomorrow I'm busy now, but tomorrow I'm going to get your other books. So there's two I don't
I
have
appreciate
yet.
that. Thank you.
Okay. A pleasure talking to you, and have a good evening.
It's great talking to you too, man.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Take it easy.